Since well before Victor Hugo looked up at Notre Dame and thought, what if a hunchback lived in there? Authors have been inspired by Paris. The Storytime in Paris podcast will help keep this tradition alive with interviews and readings from your favorite contemporary authors with a French connection. Every episode features 5 questions asked by you, our author's biggest fans, and answered live on air. Then our authors will treat us to a reading of an excerpt from their book. Who knows? Maybe you'll even be inspired to write your own great French novel. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity. My guest this week is American author and flutist Julie Skolnick. Julie has enjoyed a long career as a soloist, chamber musician, and orchestral flutist, performing all over the US and France. This year also marks her 25th year as artistic director of Mistral Music, a chamber music series that she co-founded. Just last month, in October, Julie's debut novel, Paris Blue, was published by Kohler Books. Paris Blue is a memoir about first love, recounting the story of 20-year-old Julie falling in love with Luc, an older, married man. A love story, yes, but with a dark underbelly. The language is beautiful, lyrical, and poetic, and the story avoids all the usual cliches about falling in love in Paris. I'm not exaggerating when I say I couldn't put it down. But you don't have to take my word for it, or John Irving's for that matter, who wrote the book jacket blurb, because Julie has generously offered to give away a copy of her book to one very lucky listener. Entering is easy, and I'll give you all the details at the end of our interview. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce Julie Skolnick, author of Paris Blue. Hello, Julie. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so pleased to be here.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about you and your book?
Sure. My background is not as a writer. I'm a classical musician, a flutist to be exact. I live in Boston and I run my own chamber music series. That means that I choose all the music and all the performers and I communicate with my audiences. It has become my magnificent obsession for the last 25 years of my life. But meanwhile, I had a book brewing and I began it many, many decades ago. It began when I was just 20 years old on a school year abroad program in Paris as part of my American university, Wesleyan University. And it was a story that was so big for me that I always knew that one day I'd have to tell it. And it has really followed me on a 4 decades journey. So the fact that I am finally sharing it with the world is momentous. It is called Paris Blue, and it's set against I might say myself, a magical background of classical music and Paris in the late 70s, which is when I was there. And it's about the grip of first love.
So I have 5 questions for you.
Okay.
My first question, the one that is burning inside me and I really need to know, has Luc read the story? And if so, what did he think?
Oh my God. You see, I have no idea. All I can do is guess. We are not in touch because he would probably kill me. And if he knew about the book, I have a feeling, to be very honest, I have a feeling he does know about the book because in this day and age, if you want to know about anything, it's really not hard to find out. And I will say that at one point we were Facebook friends. And then when the book came out, I unfriended him, but I didn't block him. For a while, I blocked him so that he'd never see anything about it. However, he's a big music lover, as you knew from the story. And I know he follows my website for my concert series. And the book is all over my website. And now my Facebook page is also open to the public. And I did that just because I want the book to be out there in as many ways as possible. So I'm 99% sure that he knows about the book. My friends believe that there's no way that a normal human being would not be too curious, in spite of it all, to download it at least and read it. I think he probably would be scared to death to read it, but I don't think he'd be able to resist. But who knows? There's no way I will ever know. So at one point, I was worried that I might get a letter from his lawyers or something like that, a cease and desist letter, but that has not happened. And somebody said to me, if it were to happen, just think how that would hike sales up. A Frenchman suing the American flutist for, publishing a book about their story that happened 40 years ago, more than 40 years. So I don't know the answer to that story, to the answer to that question, but my guess is yes, he does.
I feel like it would be a hard thing to resist if you knew there was a book out there about you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Were his letters all written in French?
Yes, they were all French letters. And as a matter of fact, and now I'm censoring myself a tiny bit just because those letters became such a part of my memory. I basically memorized all the letters, but I got rid of them because I was afraid that I would be, doing something illegal by using his letters. So by translating them into English and by paraphrasing them and by mixing them up and really using a lot of my memory, I hope that I'm in the clear in terms of being lawful about using his intellectual property. So, yeah.
I mean, the letters are technically yours, right?
Well, they say that, but if you talk to a lawyer, they say that he still owns the actual content. Yeah, it's a very tricky one. I am just very relieved that nobody has contacted me yet about it.
The writing in the book is really beautiful, and the letters are so romantic.
They are. I know.
The way that you write, we really get to feel along with you all of the twists and turns that your relationship takes.
Thank you.
What was it like for you to relive those moments with Luc again and put yourself back in the shoes of Julie that started that relationship so many years ago?
Well, the really interesting thing about this process, and everyone says, how did you remember all those details? The fact is that the whole first part of the book, part one of the book, the actual romance and the end of it, I won't, obviously, it's not really a spoiler alert because I'm not with him now. That part I wrote at age 22 when I got back. Do you remember the part in the book where I said I couldn't move on with my career or my life until I got down all the details? And even though I had not kept a journal back in those days, I did remember everything 18 months later. It's as if they were just indelibly imprinted on my memory. So that's when I emptied the archives of my heart and wrote that all down. So in a way, I guess true that when I finally got back to the book and wrote it up till the present time, remember that I said that I actually tried to publish this about 20 years ago. So this is not a recent endeavor. I cleaned it up recently. I cut 100 pages and I restructured it and I made it a million times better. But the initial book I did write a long time ago. But I have to admit, getting back to your original question, that what's so phenomenal about this experience is that when I am reading the book and reworking it, I am that 20-year-old girl again. That's what I can't believe. That's what most people can't really believe. Some people say, oh my, get over it. You were in college, for crying out loud. But those people have not experienced this experience of first love. And I think that what's so fascinating for me is not that you never get over the man who's in the first love. You never get over the experience of what happened to your heart when you're so young, so impressionable, and you've never experienced anything like that before. And if something that's very, very romantic and passionate ends suddenly with so much drama and so much pain, I believe you spend the rest of your life trying to figure it out. And it's not something you just move on from. And a lot of people, the world is divided into the people who, I get two responses. Mostly I get people who say, I could not put your book down. I read it in 2 sittings. It brought back all my own experiences of my own first love. Or, somebody wrote to me recently and said, I was Claire in this story. I was the wife. So that's a spoiler alert to readers who haven't read this yet. He was a married man. He was separated, thought I'd throw that in. And a few people have said, I guess I've never experienced what that is like, because I did move on from my first love and it was no big deal. So it's not the same for everybody, but I think that it resonates with so many people is that everybody has some kind of story, and this speaks to most people.
Yeah, it definitely spoke to me. It definitely resonated with me. I was in that first camp for sure.
Yeah, good. Well, that's nice to hear. And I think and I hope what makes this book special, or at least the ending, is that so many times people feel that with any past loves, past relationships, you're supposed to amputate the memories, bury them, and move on. But I think that I got to the place, and I think the point I make in the final chapter is that, our memories are who make us up the people that we are today, that we don't say anything is all bad. We are enriched from the memories of ourselves as a 20-year-old. All my memories of walking on Rue Bonaparte as a 20-year-old in Paris, they still filter through my days today. And I think that's why I kept bringing up the Wordsworth poem, because that's what his poem is all about, the life and food for future years, that beyond the present pleasure of our lives now, we have our pasts, which nourish us every day.
That leads me really nicely to my next question. Your feelings for Paris in the book are so heavily entwined with your feelings for Luc. How do you feel about Paris now, and have you been able to separate the two?
Oh, that is such a good question. And it's so hard to be 100% honest with it, too. I think that when I'm there, of course, I can't help remembering my young self walking on those same streets. I have been back with my own husband, the real love of my life, and we've created our own memories. But on the other hand, the place that you discover a city that you love for the first time that way, it will always be, I can't walk down the streets without remembering what it felt like, what my sensibilities were back in the late 70s. So there's that. And in a way, it's such a good question, and it's so full of nuance and complexity, really. I think that I will never be able to walk down the streets of Paris without feeling this bottomless pit of yearning. Like even back then, even when I was happy, even when I was sad, there was just, I couldn't soak it up enough, which is why I envy so much the fact that you live there now. Maybe I needed to live there full time to get it out of my system. Maybe you never get Paris out of your system. But, I can't, that's why I watch every TV show filmed in Paris, like Call My Agent or 10%, as they say in French, or Stupid Emily in Paris, which everybody likes to criticize, but it was still really fun to watch. And I'm on I get every blog about Paris, and I read about all the new things happening. And I don't know why. I should just spend another good chunk of time there. I mean, my dream really is to be able to talk about my book there, and to be sitting in Shakespeare and Company and have English speakers ask me questions about it, just like in, Before Sunrise or After Sunset or whatever those books were. But I'm not sure that's ever going to happen post-pandemic with no in-person events. But I do dream about that sometimes.
Never say never. We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. So people often comment on the French and how cavalier they are about infidelity.
Mm.
Do you find that to be true? And do you think that there are differences in how the French and Americans approach infidelity?
Oh, God, another really good question. I think that the cliche exists for a reason. I remember that when I came back to Paris at around age 28 or 30, doing a little bit of research for my book, I told you I've been working on this for decades. I remember sitting in a cafe and there was a man looking at me. I was one of the early ones. In Paris, everyone has a laptop now in cafes, but it took a long time to catch on. Was I 30 then? Maybe I was even older. Maybe I was 40. Who knows? But I was sitting in Café de Flore with my laptop, and some guy came over and said, I noticed, Mademoiselle, that you've been here for a while, and it's Friday night and you've been here for 2 hours and nobody's come to meet you. So I'm guessing you don't have plans for tonight. And do you want to go to dinner with me and my bistro friends? And I went, yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, I was in Paris alone. And then I learned that this particular man was married. And he said, of course, that's ma femme, c'est ma femme. But this is mon jardin secret. And the whole thing made me absolutely sick. So he admitted that, yes, he has his wife. He'll stick with his wife. But he did have his own little secret garden that maybe she had as well. And it was just something very acceptable. Who knows? Maybe it's not really like that. That is in all the stupid French movies and the stupid rom-coms and the sitcoms. But I think there is a little bit of that in my book, in that when his wife found out about the relationship, she was willing to overlook it. She didn't want to lose him. And I had a very hard time understanding how that could be possible.
I do think there is some truth to the cliche. I've had the exact same thing happen to me when I'm walking down the street and an older gentleman will say to me, oh, hey, we're having a party in here. Would you like to accompany me? And then, when I hesitate, he'll say, oh, it's okay. My wife is in the suburbs. She's got her own place tonight. So as if that's supposed to be a selling point for me.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I remember when I was too young I wasn't worldly at all, but I remember I was in a music store and I went up to the second floor to find the flute music, and the guy had followed me there, and I was so surprised because I wasn't very adventuresome at that point. And he, I can't remember where I was in I know I was single, but he kissed me, and but then he wouldn't give me his number. And he said, give me your number. I said, no. Oh, I was still living in that apartment of the old lady. I think it was before I had met Luke then. Anyway, he said, no, I can't give you my number, but give me your number. And I went, wow, this is different. Something I'm not quite used to,
So my last question for you. You're a successful flutist with a lifelong career in music.
Yes.
And there's a real lyrical quality to your writing.
Thank you.
There is. And you describe in your book what it feels like to play music and what it feels like to sing. So I'm wondering what the actual writing process felt like for you.
That's a great question also. Somebody recently asked me if I would write a little essay on the relationship between writing and playing music. So I had to dig deep to think about that. I guess what I came up with was that the urgency that we might feel to tell a story may be very close to the urgency we feel to share a piece of music. We want to express the music in a certain way. The big difference is that as musicians, we're kind of supposed to put our own egos aside and just be vessels, a vehicle for the composer's message, the composer's music. Whereas as a writer, you're really just telling your own story, your own unique story. The thing that's similar is that when you read a book, each reader it will resonate differently with everybody who reads a certain story, in the same way that I will play a Bach flute sonata a different way for a person than anyone else. And music is so abstract, so innately abstract, that when you hear a piece of music, it's going to conjure different things for different people as well. So that's the closest kind of comparison through the creative process that I can come up with. The more literal comparison would be that, sometimes you want to end a chapter on a bit of a cliffhanger, so somebody is dying to turn the page, which is what makes me happy when you said you read it in 1 or 2 sittings. In the same way in music, you might end a movement in a certain way that just implies what's going to come next. That's a bit of a stretch, but there is definitely the storytelling. Either you're writing a story, or you're painting a picture, or you're playing a piece of music. The whole creative experience is really trying to tell a story. So I think that I'm always so shocked when people say they like my writing, and it's not at all a humble brag, I swear, because the reason I'm so surprised is that I know beautiful writing. I've read writers that take my breath away, and I never thought of myself as one of those. All I know is what I do is tell it really simply. Notice there was not a single word you had to look up in my book. Whereas when I read other writers, I'm constantly wondering what certain words mean, and the sentence structures are so complex. And And for me, I mean, I try to not use the same word a million times, but I know that my credo has always been just say it simply. And so I am so touched and grateful and flattered when people say they liked the writing. And I think that as a presenter of concerts, I think one of the reasons my series has been successful is because of the personal stories that I tell, either in the program booklet that explain why and how I discovered pieces, or the spoken messages that I say to my audiences about how and why I put these certain pieces together. And I think it's the personal element that make people like our concerts.
I think that's part of it. I think you're downplaying it a little bit, though, because your writing is, maybe the words themselves are not multisyllabic, huge words you have to go look up, but the way you put them together is really beautiful. It's lyrical. Reading it, it's you write very emotionally. It's a beautiful experience to read your words.
Oh, thank you so much, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Thank you. This first excerpt I'd like to read marks the moment when I first set eyes on the object of my obsession, of my infatuation, on about the third rehearsal in the chorus that I had just joined in Paris. Here goes. On Thursday night, I returned to the chorus. I was enjoying the music when I was startled by a face on the other side of the semicircle. It was as if a movie camera panning casually across a sea of faces stopped and focused on just one. A young, strikingly handsome man, around 30 years old, sitting at the end of the second row of bases. And the camera wouldn't move. It was a sensitive face, radiating quiet intelligence. My fascination was less about his looks, however, than about his solemn demeanor, which stood out radically from the bellowing men surrounding him. I couldn't look away. At the end of the rehearsal, he disengaged himself quickly and was out the door before most people had put on their coats. Then I'm going to skip to when I see him up close for the first time, maybe a month later after I'd stared at him at every rehearsal. When the concert was over, tremendous applause brought the soloists and Barenboim back on stage for curtain calls. It surprised me that the chorus left the stage just as chaotically as members of the orchestra. Everyone was squeezing through the crowded hallways backstage. Some members were lining up in the stairwells, others streaming into elevators to return to the underground levels to grab their coats. Suddenly, my handsome bass was brushing right past me. His face was just inches from mine, but he didn't see me, intent as he was on making his way through the crowd. It was the first time I had ever seen him up close, and the effect was no less potent than if I had just imbibed a mythical love potion. I followed the stranger with my eyes through the crowds. I watched his tall figure head for the staircase to leave, so I said an abrupt goodbye to a friend and hurried over to the exit too. By the time I started climbing the stairs, he had just made the turn at the landing in the opposite direction. As I looked up, he looked down, and our eyes met. He sighed with an exasperated bouf, as if to complain about the many stairs, and I smiled. I was hoping that he too would exit at level -1 to take the metro home, but when I opened the stage door to the concourse, he was gone. He must have continued up until he reached ground level, undoubtedly to get to his car parked on the street. My high spirits from the concert only marginally dampened. I headed toward the metro in my tweed cape, wrapping my white alpaca scarf loosely around my neck 3 times and tucking the ends into the collar without freeing my hair. After the 20-minute metro ride, I sauntered home more slowly than usual. I let myself into the apartment with my unwieldy iron key, walked silently down the hallway to my room, and stood in front of the antique mirror over the mantel without removing my coat. What did I look like to that stranger on the stairs? My cheeks were rosy and my eyes glassy from the cold walk home. For once I didn't turn on the radio. It was too much of a distraction. Instead, I washed up and undressed slowly, crawled in between the sheets of my low, narrow bed, and went to sleep with the image of his face in my dreams. It was inside me somehow, like a phrase of music so beautiful I knew I would need to hear it again, or a painting that stayed with me without my knowing why. And finally, my last clip is towards the end of the book, the very last time that I would see Luke, when I was happily married with a daughter. No, sorry, I had 2 children then. And Luke had called me when he was on a business trip in Boston, and I made a plan to see him. Luke never made it to my concert, even though I had made a point of mentioning the details to him. When it was over, I changed into jeans, but deliberately kept on a favorite black top that I was wearing. I got into my car and headed toward the Boston Harbor Hotel, where new blocks of scaffolding and construction forced me onto streets I didn't recognize. A major snowstorm had been predicted for that evening. "What am I doing?" I whispered several times under my breath as I turned down incorrect one-way streets, getting farther and farther from the hotel. It felt wrong, that it was late, that I was going out of my way to see him, and that if I hurried home, I might kiss my family goodnight before they went to sleep. I had long since worked my way back to wholeness and sanity since recovering from this painful love affair. I had landed intact and thankfully in a rich and fulfilled life with a man I adored. There were evenings when I stood in my kitchen with flour-caked hands trying to perfect my tarte tatin, a fire burning in the living room, the scent of fall leaves outside. My kids would be playing a piece together in the adjacent music room and asking me to join them. "Mom, come play hide and trio with us," they'd say, and my heart would take flight. So why was I here? When you fall in love at 20, I wondered, as I drove around lost in the narrow streets of Boston's North End, does the heart form around the other person, like an old tree slowly absorbs a sign hung on it when it was a sapling, and then when it's gone, do you forever feel the lack of it, feel its imprint, where it once rested?
We'll be right back with Storytime in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Storytime in Paris. So what's next for you? Can we expect another book?
Oh, wow. I did get asked that the only other time I had an interview like this. I don't know. I have a lot of stories I'd like to tell. There is still 100 pages that ended up on the editing floor from this version when I didn't know at one point about how a memoir is about one thing. And I had to get rid of all the tangential stuff, everything but the kitchen sink that I had thrown in. So I love the process of writing, but how to put it all together and make it have a point. Now I know it's not enough to have good stories, but they need to make a whole. So I haven't really figured that out yet, but I would like to. There's nothing more fun than having a project like a book to whittle away at each day. My husband just could not understand, are you still working on that? I mean, not just the 4 decades. We've only been married 3 decades, but the book, it predated him. It existed when we married, but he couldn't believe that after it went to print, I still realized I had a possibility of making edits. So I could not keep myself from getting rid of, certain things I didn't like. And I love that process of polishing. And I do feel a little bit sad that I don't get to do it anymore. So yeah, there probably is some kind of writing in my future. But if anyone is curious about my music series, I'm just going to throw that website out, and it's called mistralmusic.org. And usually they can find all my latest newsletters about the concerts and lots of, all the videos that we have on our YouTube channel. And then the website for the actual book, Paris Blue, is just my name. So it's julieskolnick.com. And there is a book trailer on there. There are blurbs from amazing writers, the plot, the synopsis, and things like that. So I hope people will check it out.
I'll include all the links to all of that in our show notes so people can find you really easily.
Nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. It's been wonderful speaking with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, Jennifer, you are the best. Thank you. And good luck with your podcast. I can't wait to check out all the old podcasts that I haven't heard yet.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you again to Julie Skolnick for such a lovely conversation. I am sure after hearing Julie speak and listening to her reading that you are chomping at the proverbial bit to get a copy of Paris Blue. So here's how you enter to win. First, simply like Julie_Skolnick on Instagram. That's JULIE_SCOLNIK. Then like Paris Underground Radio on Instagram and tag a friend in the Paris Underground Radio Instagram post that you think would also be interested in listening to this episode. That's it. One winner will be chosen at random. Please join me next week when I'll be sitting down with author Catherine Ture to discuss her novel, It's Never Too Late to Bloom. Check back next week to see if your questions have been answered and to hear a reading from her book. Don't forget to subscribe to Storytime in Paris on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever it is you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can find the full Storytime in Paris playlist on parisundergroundradio.com/Storytime in Paris and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Paris Underground Radio. My name is Jennifer Garrity. Storytime in Paris is produced by me for the Paris Underground Radio Podcast Network. For more on this show and to discover more great podcasts, please visit parisundergroundradio.com. Thank you and happy listening.